anywhere you want. All right. So, there we go. Hi. Okay. I'm Brianna Bach. I'm a board member of the Victoria Festival of Authors, and welcome to New Works, featuring Ali Blythe, Danielle Geller, Neil Griffin, and Yasuko Ton. All right, so let's just get this spiel over with. The Victoria Festival of Authors and the Metro Theatre are located on the traditional ancestral territories of the Lekwungen people, also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. We acknowledge the ancestors, hereditary leaders, and matriarchs, as well as the creators from these lands, and give thanks for the privilege of living and working here. We are committed to serving as learners and listeners. First up, thank you to our sponsors, the BC's Art Council, Canada Council of the Arts, the CRD, the City of Victoria, Access Copyright, the Victoria Foundation, and Monroe's Books. Thanks also to the League of Canadian Poets, who has sponsored Ali's appearance at our festival. A special thank you to the Greater Victoria Public Library, who has sponsored this event. Thank you to Mo's Home Collection and Poppy Floral Art for providing our background. There will be a 15-minute intermission midway through this event. If you need to visit the bathroom, you'll find it up the stairs in the lobby. So just straight, then turn left, thank you, and then up the stairs. Closed captioning is provided and can be accessed through your phone or tablet. Please ask a volunteer for the Wi-Fi password and the URL link. At the end of the event, books will be available for both purchase and signing. This panel is moderated by Terrence Young. Terrence Young lives in Victoria, BC, where he recently retired from teaching English and creative writing to students of high school age. He is a co-founder and former editor of the Claremont Review, an international literary magazine that for 25 years has showcased writing of younger authors, many of whom have continued to write and publish into their adult years. His most recent book is a collection of poetry, Smithereens, published by Harbour Publishing, 2021. So, all right, let's get started. Thank you to New Works.
Well, a little loud. That was fast and furious. Good evening to you all, and welcome to the opening event of the 2022 Victoria Festival Authors here at what I know to be the venerable Metro Theatre, one of two venues run by Intrepid Theatre, and there have been many artistic literary and literary events have taken place here. I can remember Suddenly Dance Theatre, and the combination of dance and poetry was really interesting because I can't dance. And I'm glad that we have had the land acknowledgements for tonight's event. The fact that this event is taking place on the unceded territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, more commonly known in Victoria as the Songhees and Esquimalt peoples. Land acknowledgements are a part of our community now, and justly so. And although it's not hard to see in some areas that there's an element of virtue signaling that annoys me, but luckily I am not a virtuous person, and I don't aspire to become one because I think vice is just a lot more interesting. But with regard to land acknowledgements, I really think that the more we repeat a truth, no matter who says it, the more it will penetrate the hearts and minds of those listening until it is no longer contested or denied. And that is very important because we seem to be living in an age of immense denial. And I would like to thank the Victoria Festival itself, especially Laura Trunke, for working so long and hard to choreograph not only tonight's event, but all the other readings and panels taking place over the next few days. I do not envy her the sleeplessness that has probably dogged her for the last little while, but it's all for a really, really fine cause. So, on to this event. For many writers, the most intimidating question they encounter at readings or launches or in interview panels like this one is a question that is truly an innocuous one. A simple question tossed at writers mostly out of mere curiosity. What are you working on now? It's a horrible question. It's probably the worst question. It's a real gut punch to a lot of people because for many writers, the fact that they once wrote doesn't necessarily mean that they will ever write again, that they will ever match the success of their earlier work. And I've noticed that writers will deflect with evasive answers. Oh, I have a few things on the go. Or wouldn't you like to know? Which was what the question was asking in the first place. Well, tonight's event is new writing. And we are lucky to have with us 4 happily engaged and accomplished writers here to share the answer to that nasty question, the projects they are currently working on now. The format for the evening is simple. In the first hour, I will introduce each author briefly and alphabetically, after which introduction he or she will read a selection from a new manuscript. And in the second hour, I will pose a series of incredibly incisive questions. Not nasty ones, but just really good questions that I hope will promote discussion and take us in a whole variety of directions that possibly I had not anticipated and might cause a riot. And in the final 10 or 15 minutes of the program, I will open up the panel to questions from the audience. You may have questions for individual authors. Mine will be more global in context. So the first hour reading, bit of an intermission, and then we will commence with questions. So in the order of the alphabet, I will start with tonight's first author, Ali Blythe. And those of you who are familiar with Ali Blythe's work will know that he is the author of 2 critically acclaimed books exploring trans poetics. The debut collection Twoism and the follow-up Hymn Switch, both of which address issues of gender dysphoria, transition, addiction, sobriety, in a style that is at points dreamlike and at other points unnerving and keenly perceptive. His poems have been published in literary journals and anthologies in Canada, England, Germany, Sweden. He's the winner of the Vallum Award for Poetry, has been twice a finalist for the Dorothy Livesey BC Book Award, which was just awarded the other day, and a recipient of an honor of distinction from the Writers' Trust of Canada for emerging LGBTQ writers. But most important of all, however, is Ali's membership in a very select and small club. He is a past editor of the Claremont Review. That's right. Very small club. It's a literary magazine, and as you heard, for over 20 years, published poems and stories of young writers. His stewardship of that journal at a difficult time, by difficult I mean the old people were getting old. And so at that time, taking it over allowed many more talented future authors to experience the affirmation that a first publication can give them. And so tonight we will be hearing him read from his forthcoming collection, Steadfast, and just a couple of interesting quotations that I think to give you a flavor before he begins. Sarah Dowling writes in Canadian Literature, Blythe's attention to the quotidian, to structure, and to the ways in which both are pierced reflects the power of cis heteropatriarchy, as well as the ways in which our lives can never be reduced to its strictures. And from a poem, a man is going crazy because he has seen a color no one else has, but there is no way to prove it exists for no one but him. And Jesse Eckerlin writes in Quill and Choir, For Blythe, the process of human or personal becoming is as indelible as a text. I have permanent editing marks on my chest and stomach, he writes, and yet it is also radically indeterminate, since this world is so wide open, it is we who wear lock and key. Please welcome Ellie Blythe.
Woo! Hello, hello. Thanks for that. The Claremont Review, I love that. Talk about people who are willing to be just so in process and just send you what they just wrote, and it's and it's a fiery, wonderful mess. I just loved that job, and I was sad that it folded too. The funding process became very, very, very difficult to manage as a volunteer, to be honest, and it's too bad. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I didn't quite get what this panel was about, and this happens to me a lot. You know, new works like, oh, like a young up-and-comer. Nope, you're going to write about stuff you're just writing now, and yeah, that's a nerve-wracking thing. I was talking to Barbara Pellman about it a little bit, and I said it's like kind of like you're holed up in a hotel room, you know, and you're like stitching this new outfit, this new skin that's just you, and you know, you want to wait for the moment when you're going to appear, but you're asked to come out a little early, and people just see you like dressed in all kinds of whatnot, clouds and arrows and strangeness. So here we are tonight, reading from Works in Progress. So I think the only thing that's really like solidly nailed down for me is the table of contents. So I'm going to start there. Bright star, would I were steadfast, as thou art, not in lone splendor, hung aloft the night, and watching with eternal lids apart, like nature's patient, sleepless hermit, the moving waters at their priest-like task of pure ablution round earth's human shores, or gazing on the new, soft-fallen mask of snow upon the mountains and the moors. No, yet still steadfast, still unchangeable, pillowed upon my fair love's ripening breast, to feel forever its soft swell and fall, awake forever in a sweet unrest, still, still, to hear her tender taken breath, and so live ever, or else swoon to death. So I imagine a few of you probably know my table of contents well, it being a fairly famous Keats poem. It's in fact the last sonnet he wrote before he died of tuberculosis, and he knew he was going to die, and he's writing this love poem scribbled into a book of sonnets by Shakespeare next to A Lover's Complaint, actually. And I've stayed true to the way he wrote it into that book. So what I've done is I've taken that sonnet and broken it up into 28 poems and decided to write right into that. It's very difficult to start trying to write a poem called Bright Star. Let me tell you, it took probably 6 months of just thinking about it and throwing things out, but it was such a place of refuge for me to build this little home out of someone else's poem. And with that great first line, the near paroxysm of it, the bright star, would I were steadfast, that subjunctive mood, as thou art, you know, as you are, but like that art and that thou, it's just such a, and steadfast with its little missing A, and I was like, okay, I can live in this for a while. And so I'm just going to read a few poems from it. The first being Bright Star. Here you are, after a long and lustrous journey from afar. The flicker of you dreaming near me. Okay, my little torch, it's time I got to work, hitching this constellation of illusions to you. Other thing with works in progress, it's not in a natty little book. It's in fact in this this falling apart journal. I also decided I would only write in this journal. The whole book would be composed in here. I wrote it out in pencil, and then if I wanted to change, I actually erased and wrote over it, just over and over again until you couldn't bloody read a thing. It's just got this patina like a skating rink that's gone over and over and over again. Would I were steadfast. The way just pours with our old stories. The who did what to whom. They say, be outside your human smallness. But we too wheel in our fixed roots, in beloved darkness, with its chests full of arrows. The moving waters at their priest-like task. Nothing will ever be our anticipated debut. Still, don't we seem to keep rushing the dark stage? I suppose the orchestra is still warming up. It's partway through the tuning, and two oboes are underwater, politely handing a cup of heartbreak back and forth. No one's in the theater but us, my darling, to acknowledge this, the elemental ceremony. Upon the mountains and the moors. During intermission, we are meant to imagine the action carries on without us. Once, an act could only go on for the length of a candle. Then an interlude, in which all is reset, relit. We must re-enter so softly on our faux pas des deux. The scene has changed, but two figures continue their delicate revolutions. So it is a book of love poems. It takes place overnight, lying in bed next to a sleeping love. And so it is all apostrophe, you know. It's speaking to the lover, but the lover is asleep. So it's speaking to the self as well, and the night. Its soft swell and fall. Every night is a minor festival of making ourselves known. A slow landscape, our stolen home, where the hills are set about like pillows. The dog is a system of silence when he moves to my hand to ask if it's yet morning. The cat keeping warm between us, full of sparrow. First choruses from the willow, its lashes still loaded with nighttime mascara. I am in a good place. This thought tumbles from a higher blossom onto a similar blossom. A black dress slipped down. A star's proof in its wavering. We keep practicing the broken into of dawn. Trembling in ardent spring flowers on one mountain instead of two. I'll finish with this last poem. It's super in process, but I love it, so off we go. You know, I swear I'd be one of those people who would never say, like, I just wrote this poem. And I didn't. I wrote it, like, a long, long time ago, but here we are. You can imagine The sun may be just starting to rise, and these two people together in bed may be just waking, and the follow spot comes out on kind of the white stage of the sheets and follows two dancers across it, follows the loves, follows the myth. It's a winter dawn. We swan in the follow spot. A man with a bow pursues a wedge of swans to a lake of tears and finds refuge unfledged. Or he steals a swan's coat and marries her telluric nakedness. Or he's swan-drawn, driving a heavenly chariot, losing control of the time. Or he throws down his bow between the lines of his indecision and receives furious oration from the charioteer. There are no swans in that one, just divine self-revelation between best friends. In one, you play the young man cured of his love for another young man, and I play the other young man who, enraged, drowns. Will you sing and dive where I fell to you? The gods so like your sad songs, they transform you into a heavenly swan. In one, you play the black swan and you play the white swan, and I play the prince who chooses wrong. To break the spell, he must pledge his love. He breaks his weapon and does. In another, we both play Nijinsky and just keep lifting the form with our queerness. In every story, Eros jolts and we take hold, its ghostly hand. In apotheosis of love, we drown or ascend or die at each other's side. In our marital bed, a cloud of feathers gathers at our thighs. Our fingers, we open our mouths, and I swear I don't make these things up, clouds. And tipped in gold or lead, one arrow is pluming in. The gods so envy our love lives, they clothe ourselves in our skin. The divine self-revelation is about to begin, and we are but one myth dissolving into another, risking nihility. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sally. I'm amazed that Keats continues to inspire such words. What a poet. And you're following right alongside him. Gorgeous. Danielle Geller. I think that we can agree that a good memoir is a delightful find. Anyone who has read Tara Westover's Educated, or even Thomas O'Crone's The Islandman, will know what I am talking about. Danielle Geller's first book, Dog Flowers, is just such a book. It was published to much acclaim by One World Penguin Random House in 2021. She received her MFA in creative writing, nonfiction at the University of Arizona, and a Rona Jaffe's Writers Award in 2016. Her work has appeared in the Paris Review, the New Yorker, Brevity, Arizona Highways, and has been anthologized in This Is the Place. She lives with her husband and two cats in British Columbia, where she teaches creative writing at the University of Victoria. She is also a faculty mentor for the low residency MFA program at the Institute of American Arts. She is a member of the Navajo Nation. And I have a few appropriate quotations that may lead into what she's about to read. For our mothers, the surest protection from the past was to spin truths and falsehoods into one story, one thread impossible to distinguish in the weave. And of her mother's diaries, she writes, "There is truth in her stories, truth in our memories, if only we could let ourselves believe them." And on weaving itself, she writes, "Weaving really forces me to engage with the outside world, but then it's also repetitive enough that you're just doing that same motion back and forth, packing down the wool. There's something very relaxing about that. And then you're done, and you have this physical object. It feels a little more tangible and more concrete than writing. Please welcome Danielle Geller.
Thank you. Thank you to the festival for, I don't know, this is a really cool panel. I've never seen anything like it. This like new works, us sharing things that are a little bit scary to share. And I want to thank Laura for sort of wrangling me when I spend, you know, too much time responding to emails. And thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for coming out on this slightly rainy Wednesday evening, or, you know, zooming in wherever you happen to be. So I am reading from an essay collection that I've started writing, and I usually describe it as, oh, I'm writing a book about video games, because I told myself, I'm like, I'm never writing another memoir again. It was too hard. It took me 6 years, and living with all of that in my head for that 6 years was a lot. It was really difficult. And I had sort of 3 things living in my head that I thought I wanted to do next, but it was the video game essay collection that actually I was able to get some momentum on. And it's not just about video games, it's also about mental health and attention and narrative and memory. I've been reading a lot of physics that I don't totally understand, that I am trying to understand. And I have a husband who's an engineer, and he does his best to answer all of my questions about, like, what is like a proton? And then what is energy? Can you perceive energy in any other way than the way that it interacts with mass? And he didn't know how to answer that one, so I'm still waiting for that answer. But the way that the collection is structured is each essay is a different genre of video game. And the one that I'm reading from tonight is called Simulation. When I feel like I'm losing my mind, construction and management simulation is the genre I turn to most often. Think SimCity. The player becomes autocrat, vested with absolute power and control. In city builders, this means making decisions about zoning, budgets, resource allocation, and access to public education or parks. In an amusement park simulator like Parkosaurus, the happiness and well-being of hot pink dinosaurs is weighed against food costs, ticket sales, and 5-star reviews. And though simulators mirror aspects of the real world, everything is simplified. As mayor, I don't need to work with the city council to approve my budget or strategic plan. I'm not beholden to my residents, whose individual lives are insignificant to the game's forward trajectory. I don't need to schedule town hall meetings to field my residents' complaints about their increased property taxes. And when I demolish an old neighborhood to build a bougie commercial district and luxury high-rises, I know the family in the wood-paneled station wagon will quietly leave the city. A tech worker in a sleek sedan will take their place, and no one will utter a word about gentrification. RimWorld, a sci-fi colony management simulator, opens with a crash landing. Your ultimate goal is to orchestrate your survivors' escape from a planet on the outer edges of colonized space. But at the beginning of the scenario, their basic needs are most pressing: food, shelter, and sufficient entertainment to keep their minds off their new reality. You shape this reality. Out of all the colonists aboard the ship, only 3 survive. You are given the power to decide which do. To increase your colony's chance of survival, it's important to balance your colonists' skills, even if it means their father, mother, or romantic partner may not escape the wreckage. These skills are divided into 12 categories that correspond with functional tasks around the colony, like shooting, cooking, crafting, and even artistic production, but some are more critical than others. A colony can get pretty far without an artist, but if you forget to select a pawn with a natural aptitude for cooking, you run the risk of food poisoning. And then you've got colonists vomiting in the halls, dragging themselves to sick beds, burning through your medical supplies. You decide how many supplies your colonists are able to salvage from the crash site, as well as the level of their technological know-how. You choose where on the world map their ship crashes, which means you could bless them with a long growing period and mild winter, or you could damn them to life in a blistering desert surrounded by hostile settlements. In one of the game's content expansions, you can customize the ideological system from which your colony's society and culture emerge. How do they feel about eating meat, wearing clothing, or the subjugation of their fellow human beings? These belief systems can work for or against them. A vegetarian will have a hard time come winter if your harvest fails. A nudist doesn't need fancy clothes, but they also won't do well in extremes of hot and cold. And a colony willing to exploit human labor will yield greater resources for less, but they also risk social unrest. Most of the time, I prefer to play simulation games devoid of conflict. I am interested only in building traffic-clogged roads and pleasing parks, so I turn off mechanics like extreme weather events to dodge tornadoes that flatten neighborhoods, tsunamis that flood my expensive transit systems. For me, the game's tension is driven by the peaks and valleys of my income and expenses. If I've planned well, I can afford a new medical center to enhance the wellness of my citizens. If I've kept my lenders happy, I can borrow enough money to splurge on a stadium that will boost tourist revenue. If I haven't, I cut a few bus routes and defund education until I reach fiscal parity. But RimWorld is conflict. Its systems and mechanics center each pawn's experiences, their successes and failures, and the map becomes a landscape textured with memory. At the 2017 Game Developers Conference, Tynan Sylvester, RimWorld's developer, was invited to give a talk on the game design principles that informed RimWorld's development. From very early on, I said specifically and explicitly that RimWorld is not a game, he told the audience, then repeated, "It's not a game. RimWorld is not a game." A game, according to his definition, is a skill test. If you play well, you win. If you play better than others, you win bigger or better rewards. The consequences of failure are rarely significant. You roll back to an earlier save, maybe you lose a bit of money or experience, but the progress you've made is never lost for long. And without significant consequences, skill testing games lose the ability to tell good stories. What does Tynan believe makes a story good? Narrative tension. An early complaint about RimWorld was its unforgiving difficulty. Even if one played well, random in-game events could too easily lead to loss or defeat. I've started at least 50 scenarios, and I still haven't beaten one. But for Tynan, victory isn't the point. He calls RimWorld a story generator, and the in-game events that make the game so hard are what drive its narrative potential. Because if victory isn't the point, neither is total defeat. Loss is an essential part of story, he tells the audience, not its conclusion. A game's mechanics should create the potential for both loss and recovery, and in RimWorld, mood mechanics are one of the aspects that reflect this duality. Colonists begin a scenario with low expectations, which reflect the state of your colony. Low food stores, few material possessions, and limited entertainment. Nutrient paste isn't the most appetizing, but it's better than going hungry. Steel flooring is ugly and uncomfortable, but it's better than sleeping on the ground. They're invested with initial optimism, grateful for their lives, and it doesn't take too much to keep them content. Maybe they rescued a fellow colonist for plus 18 points. Maybe they got some lovin' plus 8 points. Or a cute animal has nuzzled their leg for plus 4. Maybe they just took a break from work and spent the afternoon gazing at clouds, plus 5. Happy pawns are productive pawns. They work harder, move faster, and your colony functions best when you're able to keep everyone's mood high. Pawns accumulate mood penalties through negative experiences like hunger, exhaustion, and pain, each to varying degrees. Missing a meal is bothersome, starvation insurmountable. A bruised rib hurts, but a severed leg causes mind-shattering pain. Witnessing death, experiencing grief are also assigned different weights. The mood penalty assigned to the loss of a spouse, the flavor text is "I am alone," or child, my own flesh and blood, is devastating, minus 20 points. Losing a lover ranks lower at negative 16. Losing a beloved pet, such a tender, unique animal, the universe is evil, with an exclamation point, costs half that at negative 8. A dead niece or nephew stings at negative 5, a dead grandparent, negative 4. The young preceding the old in death is difficult to reconcile, but witnessing the demise of an outsider, regardless of age, hardly registers on the emotional scale at negative 3. The colony's resilience is at test, and it often feels like the more your colonists have, the less happy they will be. This feeling is a product of the game's mechanics. The more wealth your colony accumulates, the higher their expectations become. They want fancier meals, more leisure time, and beautiful, expansive living quarters. A missed meal, a disturbed night's rest, an old injury. Each adds to the mental load your colonists carry. Chronically low moods can lead to mental break, but it's difficult to predict what the final straw might be. Tynan calls this elastic failure, a concept he borrows from mechanical engineering. A material's elasticity is its ability to return to its original state after distortion. As the colony manager, you could improve your colonists' moods by granting them additional recreation time, supplying them with alcohol, drugs. But any material, any mind, has the potential to fail under compounding stress. Thank you.
I've never heard that distinction made in video games between the game that you just simply play to win and the one in which you build a story or narrative. And I hadn't really encountered anything like that until I saw my grandson playing Minecraft and realized that that had little or nothing to do with winning, but to world building, which is not only a part of video games, but also part of science fiction, which I adore, and the whole idea of just creating another universe. And in altered states of consciousness, I can remember thinking I was part of a game, just living here, and I just wondered how many points I had. I'm a little competitive.
We're artists, not many.
Not many, that's right. Yes, that's so true. Jeez. Neil Griffin. I'm sure many people in this audience are fans of writers such as Bruce Chatwin, Edward Abbey, and Wade Davis, whose works arise out of their connection to nature and to the people who live close to it. Neil Griffin is very much an author in their mold. He is a poet, he's an essayist, he's a former wildlife biologist, he's the author of a poetry chapbook, Juan de Fuca, an eclogue, and a previous finalist for the CBC's Poetry Prize and the Alberta Magazine Award. His writing has appeared in Canada in Free Fall, This Side of West, and on CBC books, and published internationally in France, Poland, and the Netherlands. He is also a member of a literary cooperative, the New Twenties, and he is a regular contributor to their magazine. His work includes eco-criticism, travel, nature writing, all centered around exploring the historic and contemporary relationships between people and their environments. He can also be extremely funny when he chooses to. One only has to read one of his movie reviews to see the extent of his wit, and I know that I will never be able to look at the winning entries of wildlife photography contests with anything but skepticism from now on. Currently, he is an MFA student at UVic working on a book-length lyric essay about extinction. In a recent interview with the VFA, he said, "What attracts me is wild places, or wild sensations, where the history of mankind seems to lie only gently on the land. What I want in art and in life is to move away from abstraction, to get closer to some wholeness of feeling or experience. Nature, however defined, is for me one way to do that." And just to give you a taste of his thoughts on wildlife photography, The photos on display fall into two categories, he writes. The first is the gift shop sublime, the snow-spattered Italian Alps on a gilded dawn, a bison dark and monolithic in a snowy field, a fish-eye shot of an eagle lording over an Alaskan inlet. These are pictures that don't evoke a feeling, but instead summon a feeling of a feeling, emotion once removed. It is diluted romanticism, destined to be covered with a motivational aphorism and slapped up on the break room wall above the compost bin.
Nice.
See what I mean? Please welcome Neil Griffin.
Unfortunately, that was all the jokes, because I'm going to read a more serious piece. You really had to dig through it, because I'm only like scattered around on the website. At the internet, I don't have a whole bunch of books anywhere. So it's impressive to go rooting through my internet detritus. So I've been working on a book about extinction for a couple of years in the writing department in my MFA. I used to be a wildlife biologist, worked in Central America and East Africa, but I quit for a number of reasons. But one of them was that I was having a hard time sort of making sense of what I was seeing of this sort of world that was dying, that was disappearing, that all the things that I had sort of loved and was trying to dedicate my life to sort of just kept winking out one by one. And so I ended up turning to the thing that felt more stable to me, which was poetry, which was this other thing that I had loved, that I was like, well, this isn't going to die because it's already dead. You can only get like 40 to 50 people to come out on a Wednesday night and listen to people blather. So this essay that I'm going to read, it's an event that happened sort of shortly after I had tried to make that switch. I had quit biology and I was switching to try and be a writer. And it took me years and years and years to actually write it. So it's about sort of poetry and loss and this sense of trying to get close to sort of this wholeness of being. It's called Stag. That winter, I lived alone in a house on the shores of a Soyuz lake. The house belonged to a girlfriend's parents. They used it as a summer home in the bright months when the sun clawed its way over the eastern mountains early and burned the valley with long hours of casual violence. In winter, it lay empty, except for an old man who came around every 2 weeks to peer in the windows and make sure everything was okay. I had quit my job. I was going to be a writer. Her parents loaned us the house, and we planned to spend the winter there. But she had attachments in Calgary and took to traveling back and forth. First, 2 weeks in each place, then 3 weeks at a time in Calgary, and then longer. We grew used to saying goodbye. I lived in the house and set up a small desk which faced east and looked out over the lake. A Soyuz lake is a hatchet wound in the southern reaches of the Okanagan Valley, gouged out by a receding glacier 13,000 years ago. The mountain-fed lake is a shimmering enticement and a deadly one. It is deep and always cold. The drop-off from shore, sharp and sudden. One step too far takes an unlucky swimmer from waist-deep to abyssal. The shock is difficult to recover from. Every year, people drown. When I couldn't write, I wandered the surrounding hills or read. There were horses in a paddock nearby. On cold mornings, when the air in the valley clung to my bones and the house refused to warm, I would visit the horses with pockets full of apple slices. The hot gasp of their breath on my hands was a small comfort, and afterwards they would canter circles on the frozen mud of the paddock, while marble statues of exertion rose as steam from their bodies. There was no bookstore in town. The address was unlisted for deliveries. I had brought books with me to last the winter, including a heavy, ragged Ted Hughes collection. Hughes was the first poet I read that made me want to write. His lines are coiled, muscular, and often laden with menace. They feel born of some primal element, some connection with a fiercer, older nature. There is transcendence, but it is not of a light or airy breed. It is burrowed towards, dug out with ruined fingers and shattered nails. Read in a city, his poems sometimes sound cartoonish, dismissible as self-serious. Read outside, in a cold wind, they are a knife carving open the day. Late one night, I sat outside the house, wrapped in a heavy blanket and reading. The sky was cloudy and moonless, dark against the still darker mountains. Little bubbles of light, stray cars, climbed up and down the walls of the valley on the other side of the lake. Sound carries cheaply, and occasional rattles of laughter floated across the water. Suddenly, the night was stilled. A hoarse, high scream cut through the darkness, first once and then again. Terror, a promise of violence. The next morning, the horses were still panicked, rolling their eyes in a lingering fear. Their owner said she had chased a cougar away from the paddock in the night. The previous summer, I had spent 10 days hiking in the Yorkshire Dales National Park in England. Bronte country, Hughes country, windstone dales, black rock peaks, and sharp beds of heather and gorse. Rain stormed down the mountainsides, cutting across the flats in fierce swaths, blistering my waterproof gear. The sky never seemed to clear. Crouching in old stone cowsheds, I ate my lunches like an 11th century shepherd or a Roman sentry, stranded in the borderlands and wondering when, if ever, he would know home again. There is a story about Ted Hughes. There's lots of stories about Ted Hughes, but there's one that I like. Hughes and friends are traveling by car through the Yorkshire moors when they hit a hare. I imagine his city friends want to leave it, but Hughes, a country boy, working class, playing a role, throws the dead hare in the back of the car. When they arrive at the cottage they're staying at, Hughes asks for the kitchen. The rest of them stay in the warm front room, drinking and gossiping. When one friend becomes curious, when Hughes is slow to return, and enters the kitchen to see what he's up to. In the kitchen, she sees the hare, splayed open on the oak table like a ritual sacrifice, and Hughes, wild-eyed, standing over it, reading its entrails. She creeps back out of the kitchen. One morning, the rain quit. I took advantage of the calm to add a detour to my route. The thankless trudge of mile after mile, day after day across spongy, wet ground had worn me out. My map showed a small waterfall nearby, secreted away in a limestone canyon. Descent was treacherous, the rocks slimy with wet grass and mud. The temperature dropped until I could see my breath, and the trail at the bottom was thick with tangles of roots jutting out from the eroding walls like ancient, grasping hands. I could hear the waterfall, a thundering monotony ahead of me. It was smaller than expected, but fierce just the same, pouring a week's worth of rain down a 2-story drop and into a shallow basin. Mist and spray exploded against the walls. I bent down to fill my water bottle when I noticed something bobbing in the pool at the base of the waterfall. Brown fur, darkened by wet and glimmering here and there with spots of beaded light. The corpse of a red stag. A small one, young, maybe caught in a flash flood upriver. Bone yellow antlers stabbing the air. Pummeled by the falling stream of water, it turned over, churning like a piece of dead wood, spinning and going nowhere. Early one day in December, I drove that girlfriend to the airport for the last time that year. We were spending Christmas separately and wouldn't be back together at the house for a few months. I returned to Osoyoos just in time for the bleary winter sun to start its morning rounds. In winter, the lake freezes, but only partially. Cataracts of cloudy ice float over the eye of the water. I liked to take a kayak out sometimes and shatter that ice, breaking it up into scattered geometries of light. Ducks followed in my wake, feeding on whatever I stirred up. But that morning it was cold, and I stayed inside, sitting at the desk and watching the lake. A family of river otters skittered around like furry stones. An osprey, strangely overwintering on a nearby nesting pole, swooped low, studying gaps in the ice like a general plotting a campaign. I looked down at my work, and when I looked back up, everything had changed. Standing in the middle of the lake, Walking on water was a stag, its silhouette sharp and clear against the white walls of the valley beyond it. It had walked out on a shallow dome of ice, but its pathway had shifted and now it stood isolated. The sun was out, the ice was thin. Wind whipped up and down the lake, prying floes apart. The stag took a step, and I watched it founder. I heard the whispering crinkle of ice and saw the cracks which spread from it, weakness breeding weakness. I smelled the cold, dark water underneath as it rushed up through the ice like black rot through an apple's body. The ice broke, and the stag plunged into the lake. If it had been at the edge of the flow, he might have been able to swim to shore. He had fallen through in the middle. I watched his body flailing up and out of the water, struggling for purchase. A few times he almost made it, the engine of his hooves churning at the ice's frontier, but he always slipped back in. Parts of the ice broke off, fragments pinwheeling over top of him. He made no sound, no bleeding, no cries, only the silent, desperate festering of his panic. I saw his eyes, bright and flashing. I watched him tire. Thank you.
A winter in Osoyoos.
One of the really secret important parts of being a writer is to meet people who know rich people and will let you stay at their nice places that you can't afford.
Good idea. I can't imagine. I have spent a winter in Osoyoos, so it's a very dead town in the winter. An appropriate story for that. Yasuko Tan. Some writers defy categorization. Their interests are so broad and your curiosity so compelling that their work appears eclectic, unpredictable. I believe Yasuko Tan fits this description. Short stories, memoirs, novels, essays, song lyrics. She writes in all these genres and does so with great success. She's lived in Mexico, in Germany, and Latin America. Her debut novel, Mysterious Fragrance of the Yellow Mountains, won the 2016 Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize, and her short story, Floating Like the Dead, earned her the 2009 Journey Prize. The book, Floating Like the Dead, was nominated for the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize, and she has been a finalist for the David Adams Richard Prize, the Canada Council for the Arts Future Generations Millennium Prize, and the Hudson Prize. Her stories have been published in numerous literary magazines, including Prairie Fire, Descant, Fireweed, all the usual suspects. And her nonfiction has appeared in publications as diverse as the Vancouver Review, Island Parent Magazine, and Subterrane. Her Mistakes to Run With, was released to great acclaim in 2019 from Penguin Random House Canada, and she will be reading tonight from To the Bridge, which will be coming out. It will be coming out with Penguin Random House in the very near future. And a couple of appropriate quotations just to introduce her. I believe every character we write contains some facet of us. They must. They may have been given directions and helped along by the muses, but they have come from our minds. They often embody these things, those things that we respond violently or passionately to. And I'd say if you're not responding in an emotional way to your characters, then you may not yet have found your true work. And from Quill and Quire, for a writer who calls herself instinctive or intuitive, connections between Tan's life and her fiction become apparent only when she looks back on a completed body of work. She writes, maybe some writers have the experience that they know precisely what it is they're writing about when they are. I really don't have that luxury, Tan says. Only later on, when I can look at what's in front of me, I can say, oh, okay, I see what it is that was haunting me at the time. Please welcome Yasuko Tan.
Thank Thank you for that great introduction. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight, and thank you so much, Laura, for all of the hard work that you've done to bring us here. Appreciate it. Since I'm reading the beginning of the novel, I don't think it requires much introduction, so I'm just gonna leap right in. When my mother died, I used to wonder how anyone could become so broken they would want to end their own life. Now I am a mother myself. At this mathematical point in time, waking an alarm, the digital clock screaming, wah, 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 get up, your life is shit. You're not making enough money, love, not making good. You're late for something, wah, wah, wah. Then I'm in a hospital bathroom with handrails, my daughter Juliet on the toilet, pee tinkling in the bowl. You've heard of a thing called privacy, right? You surrendered your right to privacy when you tried to kill yourself. I say those words, kill yourself, for the first time, out loud. There's nothing for me to kill myself with in here, Juliet says, wiping in disgust, flushing, pushing her IV pole back to bed. You're making too big a deal out of this. She tangles herself in the tubing, cannula bruises on her arm like the defense wounds of an assault victim. And as I help her maneuver herself onto the mattress, I say, stealing a tube of lipstick is not a big deal. Failing an exam, staying out all night. But life and death, that's as big a deal as it gets. What ev? A sadness, the sadness of having survived, passes over her face. Then she's back to smiling, as though this is a gory horror movie she's watching, not starring in. I will remember the two of us, my daughter and I, sitting on her bedroom carpet at home, her face green seeming in the morning light, haloed like an apocryphal angel. I will, in years to come, recall her lips not moving, but her voice as clear as a bird. Last chance to dance, bet it all, let it ride. I will recall her birth, her hand in mine. I will learn a day can start out as utterly ordinary and transform itself in such a manner that by dusk you realize everything you love can be taken away. A day before the grind began, I turned off the alarm clock and lay in bed asking myself, unrhetorically, how it would feel to wake up happy for a change. Juliet was on a scholarship track to university. Apply everywhere, I'd encouraged. Give yourself the broadest range of choice. My husband Sid did the recycling in his bathrobe. I turned on the coffee, smoked a cigarette, sunlight on the front step, a breeze rattling the wind chime, seagulls squawking, wrestled the garbage bin down the rutted driveway. A good mother, anchored, in the words of Sophocles, to life. Our family had had its troubles, but in 10 months, Juliet would be gone, and her old bedroom would become my craft room, or my library, anything. Sid and I had made it through the tunnel. We could see the light of freedom. Freedom. Well, I just throw myself at life and see what I stuck to, what stuck to me. The thing I wanted most, also what scared me the most. I shuffled back inside, past a pile of flip-flops, hoodies on hooks, snagging my foot on the brown and yellow shag rug, catching myself on a wooden cradle holding gumboots. Juliet opened her door a crack. Can I talk to you a minute? Her body faded into the perpetual darkness behind her. Sure thing. But first I poured the day's first cup, sloppy in my hand, and I returned, coffee sloshing, to Juliet's room. The day's first coffee attracts chaos. Being a good parent hinged on how quickly I responded to Juliet's needs. Spit out words, smiled with an effort mitigated by years of practice at hiding my feelings, hoping Juliet didn't detect the tension beneath my disguise. In parenting, as in life, Selfishness battled duty. They may as well have been best friends, these enemies who relied on each other for the very fight that defined them. Wearing this mask, like a therapist or a priest, I knocked softly and entered the room saying, "What's up?" I pushed aside Juliet's sketchbook, loose leaf, library books, and half a carrot to sit cross-legged on the gray utility rug, coffee steaming. I deferred my nagging, though there was much to nag about, noticing as I adjusted to the pale gloom, a salad bowl filled with a semi-opaque liquid by the carrot and 2 pots from the kitchen on her carpet, a sour smell coming from them. I made a mental note to do the rounds later, collect dirty laundry with my red plastic hamper. I remember the smell, a vine of ivy growing from a paper cup on her windowsill, her pallor, her face the shade of jadeite dishes. Juliet sat down on the floor in front of me, also cross-legged. "Is it okay if I miss school tomorrow?" she said. "It all depends on the why." Vomit in the bowl, in the pot. Hangover. Juliet hungover? Electricity prickled the hair on the back of my neck. I saw a mini montage of me as a teenager, and before I could launch into a spiel about underage drinking and throwing your life away, she added, "Actually, could I take a few days off?" The vision morphed. Not hungover, pregnant, morning sickness, 17 and a mom? We'd work through this. I'd stay home while Juliet finished school. I ran with other scenarios. Juliet may want an abortion. I looked from the bowl to the pots and waited. And then what did I ask? If you are sick? If you are pregnant? I smiled to reassure her. When someone you know is in trouble, shut your mouth and open your arms. I removed all judgment from my voice. What's the deal? I'm still reeling from her next words. I tried to kill myself, she said. I'm going to leap forward a little bit. I took a bottle of Tylenol, but don't worry, Mom, I puked it all up. I reached across her desk, an old hand-painted door on cinder blocks covered with stickers, to grab her laptop. I Googled Tylenol overdose and amounts. It took a while. I kept gagging. The pills were so sweet, Juliet said. I only told you because it didn't work. When to seek medical care. You must call a doctor, a poison control center, or emergency medical services for any suspected acetaminophen overdose. In the comments, a retired general internist, former intensive care physician, had written, "It's a terrible way to go. It takes days while your liver totally fails. You feel nauseous, regret your deed, then, if no liver transplant can be done, die miserably." I said, "I think maybe we should go to the hospital." Words that at their heart meant, where did I go wrong? Everything I'd believed, hoped for, thought I had, my biggest accomplishment, a daughter, a happy family, a lie. Hospitals should be a place of light, like at the seaside where one may find healing. Instead, we moved through the bowels of a beast that breathed from vents and exhaled into rooms Dickensian with suffering. The walls were chipped from stretchers clipping corners at high speeds, brittle with pain. We found the reception area where a sign told us to take a number, like at a deli, and I wanted to reverse time as I went through the motions, settled Juliet in a chair, pulled a paper tongue from the dispenser, lacking words of comfort or counsel, and we waited. 3 people ahead of us in line, including a man, his injured hand wrapped in dish towels. I tried to buy chips from the vending machine, but kept pushing EE instead of double E and got $8 worth of the wrong candy. A man struggled with his IV pole at the door and glanced my way abjectly, so I diverted my gaze toward the white letters on large green arrows pointing to other departments down the hall, signs of what lay ahead. The intake staff called our number. I made myself move as if I was not in mid-panic. I told myself not to jump around like a crazy woman, above all, not to cry. We told the nurse what time Juliet took the Tylenol, how much. She was admitted right away, shoved into a wheelchair, a plastic bracelet snapped on her wrist with her name, her birth date. There was no judgment, only speed and concern, a chilling look, frightening efficiency. The nurse told us time was of the essence as she rushed Juliet along a corridor. Tylenol is one of the worst drugs out there, she said. Thank you.
In preparation for this evening's event, I was privileged to receive some of the new work through email, and I could read it in advance, and Yasuko left a little note saying, oh, just read the first 20 pages. You don't have to read the whole thing, as if. It's one of the worst nightmares the parent can ever have, and I was riveted right through to the very end, so thank you for the whole book.
Oh my God,
No, it was a treat.
oh dear.
I was scarred for life, so there you go. Anyway, at this point, we have had our readings, and so it's just about an hour into it, and so we'll have a 10 to 15 minute intermission, during which you can use the washroom. I'm not sure, is there a book table here tonight? All right, okay, so please peruse the book table, and the authors will be here to sign books, and we will reconvene for some questions. Thank you. We up? All right, it's good. Welcome back to the second half of this event. As I promised, incisive questions. One of the bands that I always liked is a band called Sigur Rós, and I saw an interview with them on NPR once, and it was a good exercise in how not to ask questions, because Sigur Rós, Icelandic, very laconic, very kind of pensive, and they really don't show their cards much. And this very enthusiastic interviewer was asking all these questions, which sounded complex, but really ultimately, when you looked at the question, it could be answered yes or no. And that's what they did. And it was, you know, your music, it's so incredibly extensive, and it goes about it. And do you think that, you know, it would be something that would become? No. They just wouldn't give an inch on anything, and it was it's a very good, painful study on what not to do. So I'll see if I can elicit some responses more than yes or no here. I want to ask you guys about this new work that you've read here tonight, and how it arises out of your earlier writing, or not. What I mean to say is that writers learn from practicing their craft, and often a definite progression in style and skill is apparent when looking back at older work. In some cases, in my case, we are horrified when we look back on our juvenilia, wondering how we could have ever written such drivel, and other times we marvel as well as how bold and risky we were and wish we had such intuitive and imaginative leaps in us today. What then have you taken from your previous works, and what have you left behind?
Yes.
No.
I was going to say no, so.
Yeah, okay. So I think I've actually taken a lot of what I learned from writing Dog Flowers, and I think I'm trying to do some of the opposite of what I had done. But you know, the thing that got me started writing Dog Flowers was the loss of my mother, and the book was really, when she passed away, I inherited this suitcase of her stuff, and I didn't grow up with her, and so it was this process of like excavating her life. And I was an archivist, so there was this lens of like processing it through as an archivist. I used to say it was about my mom, but really it was about, yeah, I don't know, like looking into the history of my family and the relationships I had, not just with her, but also with my sisters and my dad. And so, yeah, so it was a memoir, but structured it kind of in a weird way, and the present moment kept shifting. And I think that frustrated some people, because when you go into a memoir, you're like, there's going to be one sort of arc, and there's going to be a resolution. And I ended my book with a lot of mini resolutions. Anyway, so then I realized, I'm like, I think I'm actually better at essays. And right before Dog Flowers was published, my dad passed away. And I like even in Dog Flowers, I like didn't want to write about him because the relationship was so full of hurt, and like it was just really ugly. But he, you know, I can't not. He just keeps sort of like coming in. But video games was the place where we connected most, and like that's where our happy memories are. And after he passed away, like that was one of my ways of coping with that loss. But framing it through this lens of video games and looking into like the mind and addiction and how our brains work and what is time, like all of those things have helped me navigate that loss in a way that feels more sustainable.
So approaching it tangentially as opposed to a straight-on memoir is something that you're trying now.
Yeah, I can't really afford to like lose a year of my life to just writing and laying in bed. I have a job now.
It does sound like you've given yourself a certain kind of kindness in writing to this almost like constraint that you can write into and be okay and be able to move through what you're moving through rather than just everything being out on the page for you said for 6 years, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find something similar in working into constraint. My three books I do think of as a trilogy. The sort of the first one, the characters, running around trying to put a body on other than their own, a different skin, and then the second one, trying to be in their own body, and then the third one, body next to another body and speaking to another body. But in each of them, I do find that I need a constraint to be able to write into that, whether it's just like I'm only going to write in couplets like I did for this one, or I can only have like 6 feet to the line or something so that I can kind of forget what I'm doing and be able to write into that. And I think there is something about like giving the work a constraint that feels like the constraint that the body can have that also really like moves the work. Like if it was just free form for me, I can do anything I want. I'm like, nope, that doesn't feel accurate to life in some way.
Yeah.
Well, I admire you guys, both of you, for being able to do that and imagine structure, because I think that's what I hear you saying. It's like, you've got the vessel and you put it into it. You have got a technical inspiration, or you have a structure into which the material fits. I suppose the equivalent to that in a novel might be working off of an outline, but unfortunately, I just can't seem to, get it together when I do it that way. So
So you're described as an intuitive writer. Does that mean that you don't use a structure? The Mysterious Fragrance of the Summer Yellow Mountains, was that just an intuitive piece? And is that how you're pursuing this in the second novel as well?
Yeah, structure comes after I have written, 100, 200, 300 pages of notes. And I guess that's how I find the subject matter. It sounds strange to say that that I begin writing and I don't yet know what it is I'm writing about, but that's often how it happens. I do a lot of free fall exercises with myself. It's kind of like my morning prayer, and that's how I begin to discover what it is that's consuming me. Yeah.
Interesting.
No. I don't know if I have enough early work yet to say
that you're turning your back on anything.
That I'm ready to turn some of it might still be good. Actually, I did find one of I had a phase, I think, in like poetry workshops where the prof and also my peers in it were like, your work's getting really crunchy. You've gone stagnant already. And I was like, oh shit, I've only written like 8 poems. This is bad. But I found it actually even then, like, some of the earlier stuff that I have, or some of like the first few poems I published, feels in it such like a freedom and an excitement and this like felicity with language that then at some point when I started like, oh, now I'm in school for writing, that it seemed to lose some of that, for it to disappear. So it's like during the year when I'm in classes, some of them taught by fantastic professors, but it's like this sort of changing approach to language, and then in the summer when I get time away with it, it's like this constant rediscovery of language, this trying to find that sort of that freedom, that first freedom that I felt, and it's always there to go back to, but it's sort of this like tension of it having, maybe it is imposing a structure when I'm trying to be emergent instead.
Yeah, I was thinking stylistically mostly in this comment, in this question, although content does play into it. But do you notice anything that you're doing different stylistically from how you had done it before in terms of writing? Is there, what have you learned?
I don't know. I sometimes feel like I'm different stylistically, but then I've got this editor who like brings it back to this style. I sometimes think that he is like the other artists in the room for me. So yeah, I do sometimes go here and there, but he sort of brings me back to this one place in a way.
Do you guys think about style, though, like before you sit down and write? I mean, is style something that...
What is style?
Like, what is style and voice and these things when we say a piece is voicey? I mean, like, I don't know how much... well, I can't speak for everybody up here, and I'd love to hear what your guys' process is, but I don't really think about anything like that when I'm writing, not in terms of, you know, like, what should the style...
The only thing I think about is like what sounds wrong. Like I know that when I've written something that sounds wrong, it's usually because I'm just trying to get the ideas out.
Yeah.
Like that's like that first draft. And as I'm reading it back, I'm like, this is not, you know, like there's a performance aspect to it almost, like the first time that I write it. And then I just have to like rein it in. Or I'm like, okay, well, what do I actually think? Or like, what do these ideas mean? Or, you know, like, yeah, I don't know, what more do I need to pull from this? But I don't know, that idea of, you mentioned like emergent, or just sort of like, you said something that reminded me of, if you can find a different word, and Audre Lorde, you know, she has this, I'm not going to remember the quote exactly, but, you know, there are no new ideas, or just like new ways of expressing those ideas. And I think that's what a lot of this project has been for me, is reading about all of these complex systems and the way that all of these different people from like different disciplines and backgrounds are trying to explain the same like fundamental things, and looking at where language, looking at how people are trying to use language to describe, you know, things that are both similar and very different, is giving me like that new perspective that I think I need to write something that feels new or relevant.
Yeah.
I think I feel like you said, like when something's wrong, I can feel it when it's wrong. Like I'm not sure I go in and think consciously about, okay, this is a style, this is my style, this is the voice that I want to use in this poem or this essay. But I can feel when it's not working, so it creates this kind of like almost this negative space drawing where like, okay, I know all the ways that it doesn't work, and there's something in the middle that does work, and I don't know what that's called or how to get to it. But I know when I've strayed away from it and stepped over into something where a line isn't working, a word, it sounds like not a word that I would use, but a word that I had read somewhere else.
Yeah, I was thinking of Karl Knausgaard when I wrote this, because he in his opus, Mein Kampf, he had been writing novels that were becoming more and more tight and eliminating adjectives, and becoming one of those people who reduces his language to just these spare things. And he grew absolutely frustrated with that kind of writing, and he just turned and became kind of like a maximalist. He was just not going to edit himself any longer. He was going to write everything, and literally everything, if you've read his stuff. And it's a complete about face in terms of what he was writing. He just abandoned that whole style of work and changed. And I mean, that doesn't happen necessarily so drastically in all of us, but sometimes we see that, you know, I've written this kind of thing before. I have done this before. I don't need to write this again. I need to turn. I need to change. So to prevent repetition, you know, you keep an eye on yourself and turn when you should, kind of thing. Is that occurred to you, that you want to turn right instead of left this time?
Well, I think, you know, when you finish a book, you finally feel done with something. There's something that you've let go of. And so because I keep thinking about the way that you put it, you know, what do you bring with you and what do you leave behind? That's really intriguing. Because I think that I leave it all, and I won't even crack it unless I have to, if I have to read from it. And that's always really painful, because then I'm so deep into the next work. So it's almost, it feels like I don't bring any of that. But at the same time, you can't say everything at once. And that's what pushes the next book. It's like, well, I could only fit this much into, you know, Mysterious Fragrance. So now I've got to write a new work that, you know, and so it goes like that. But then once something is done, it is the book on the shelf, and I just put it away and sort of try to tell myself, okay, as far as that goes, you can rest now. You know?
Do you see those, like, sort of seeds of the next project, the next thing, when you're working on the one that you're working on?
Always. Yeah.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
It's like a little creature just starts to come up somewhere,
Yeah,
right? And you're like, oh, I better wrap this thing up. Here comes this
Before
little,
that one catches up to me.
before that one's there. And you just kind of like take some glances at it, whatever. And then you're like kind of just happy finishing this thing up because there's this, like,
There's this other thing.
there's
It's
this
just
little creature back
niggling
here.
at you.
Or whatever, yeah.
But you know, then you look in the mirror and you go, oh my God, like I'm getting older. I might have, well, you know, I mean, there might be 10 years, there might be 20, I don't know. And so all of a sudden, all these ideas you had, you realize that you are going to have to start being selective and going, you know, I'm going to have time to maybe do this, maybe this, but you know, I can't possibly write everything that I want to write.
Yeah.
It's the novelist dilemma if you work in short form.
Yeah.
Oh, I love short form too, yeah.
I spent a month and a half writing one essay. That's not
Month and a half.
sustainable. I don't know. I mean, it was a pretty focused month and a half. But no, what you said was like, I don't. So like, I think you said something like how you turn. You know, if you realize you're writing the same thing and how you turn away from that. You know, like if I sort of think about it, you know, in my first book I write about losing my mom, I've started writing about losing my dad, and so it could be framed as, well, I'm writing about grief, but in Dogflowers, I think I actually have a line where I'm like, I'm not writing about grief, and the thing that I've sort of discovered as I'm working on this project is after my dad died and then my grandmother who raised me passed away not very long after that, I had this like overwhelming feeling of like, oh, now I can feel it. Like now I can feel that loss. Like I've lost everyone there is to lose. I don't like, but like it was, you know, like this idea of family that I had been like holding on to. I couldn't quite like, I don't know, like let myself go when it's felt like I still had these people that I did have to lose in my life, if that makes sense. So now I'm writing about grief.
Yeah. How you are, yeah. We're in a far different world from the one that writers had to deal with even as recently as 20 years ago. In writing departments, talking with Danielle about this, there are ethics committees that are struck to look at a thesis, to sort of advise you about what the ethical concerns of what you're doing. And many publishing houses across this country have sensitivity readers who examine books accepted for publication for any potentially unethical or offensive material. We look at earlier works in both film and in literature, and we can see immediately that they would probably not have been produced or published today. What are your feelings about these changes? In what ways have these developments had an impact on the words that you set down on the page, if any at all? Do you look back on anything you have written or read with a different lens now from how we used to look at it? Is this an issue for you people? You writers?
No.
Damn.
I mean, I am a sensitivity reader, and at work, I get asked to do that work all the time. And I mean, I don't mind having that ethical mind when I come to my work. I think it can be akin to freedom in everything you're doing and all that. I think just coming in with a good heart and a good mind, and holding a lot when you come to the page and when you go to read it again. I read a lot of old horrible books and love them, even though they're extremely problematic, because I find them freeing and artistically exciting, and I don't necessarily, and I come to it with the understanding that this isn't okay now. That character isn't okay. What that editorialization, it's not okay, but I'll still read it. I'll still enjoy it. I don't like the narrowing of the no. I like the here it is. I may not support it. I may not, run out and buy it or share it or whatever, but like I like freedom in reading and writing and just doing it with your good heart and your good mind, and
Nice.
with learning as much as you can about the world, I suppose.
I think that's a really, really awesome answer. It's
Yeah.
like, I can hate what you say, but I will go down to the mat to fight for your right to say it, but I do think also, like, writers have a moral responsibility. There was something that, I think it was John Gardner, who was a professor, he was a novelist, but he also wrote a great book on the art of fiction. And when he talks about the morality of fiction, one of the things he said really stood out to me, where, the writer needs to remember if there is good to be said, to say it, to remember that at any time, somebody reading your work might be in the process of losing a loved one. They may be dying themselves. They may be, so when at all possible, right towards the light. It's not to say that the darkness doesn't exist and we will acknowledge that darkness, but to always write in such a way that people are inspired to keep living, to keep moving on. I think that's the responsibility and the gift we have as writers.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. You've spoken about these creatures that are crawling up behind you and tapping you on the shoulder. Several of you work in more than one genre: poetry, memoir, essays, short fiction, novels. How do you know what you're embarking on when you start to write new material, or do you know?
Do your little critters tell you? Did they say, I'm
They
a
say
poem?
poem, poem.
Mine
They say
do
poem,
too.
poem.
Yeah, they're like, I'm a story, I'm a novel, yeah.
Yeah. Is it always clear?
Yeah, and I kind of think if it's not, then it's not good for and either. Like, is it a story, is it a novel, then I just chuck it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. Chucking.
Well, because I have a bajillion ideas, right? And I'm going to die soon, so, I got to narrow it down somehow.
Maybe you
Got
could
to
just
get a big whiteboard out with a power ranking of your ideas.
Right.
check a few of those ideas over here. Yeah.
I will bequeath them to you.
Danielle, is it now in your mind you're turning away from memoir, moving towards essay? Is that what comes to you, essay?
I don't know. I wish I had some of these creatures speaking to me. No, I think the thing that I've realized about my process is it takes a really long time for me to decide what I think about something. I think it's why I'm bad at social media, because I can't just go to Twitter and be like, I have this opinion. Because as soon as I start typing it, I'm like, do I have that opinion? Like, what is that? And that's how I sort of end up just writing these really long essays that have a billion different things in them. And when I try to explain it to people, I'm like, it's this and this and this. And they're like, I have no idea what that means. I'm like, well, hopefully it means something at the end. Maybe.
Yeah. Neil, poems become essays, essays become poems, or do you know immediately that you're on to one or another?
I usually know pretty quick if it's one or the other. I think everything starts as poem. And then sometimes it's trying to write a poem, and it's like, okay, maybe this is less about sort of language and line and image, and maybe this is more about I'm trying to unpack an idea, and now I want to do a bunch of research in
Right.
it as well. And if I give this to someone who likes poetry, they'll go, what the hell is this? Do you put like a number in this? There's facts. Is that a footnote? I don't want to read that.
What a weird poem this will
What
be.
a strange poem. I don't want to read experimental stuff. So I think, but mostly it sort of starts as poem, and then some of them sort of morph into essay. But one of the things that I like, especially about poem and essay, is that I just call everything a poem or an essay. And my supervisor
What did you
gets
call
it.
that one? Sorry, I actually missed it when you were introducing whether it was a poem or an essay, and I was like, crap, I got to figure this out now. And I think it could have gone both ways.
I think I called it an essay, but it's also kind of like a prose poem,
Yeah.
I guess. And
Very
those
much.
two things
Especially
are
with
sort
your
of like the
movements,
same
the way you were
thing.
moving when you were reading it or something.
Trying to
like-
practice my inner poet. I'm going
No,
to
that
become a
is-
slam poet
Oh,
just
boy.
for...
There was an article recently about Elizabeth Hardwick, written by Daryl Pinckney, and he quotes her as saying that you cannot write by committee. Writers must be free to make their own mistakes. He then observes, however, that it is much easier to tell someone else what is wrong with what he or she is doing than it is to see these things for yourself. How does the process of editing new material work for you? Do you have readers that you trust to offer advice on content and structure? What are your feelings about writing groups? Some of you work as teachers in writing departments. Do you follow the lessons you teach in your students' workshops? Really? How is that the process of collectivity? Do you have one? And what is it?
I am a collective of, well, there's me. I write the poems. I edit the poems for a long, long, long time. And then usually, I don't know, it's okay to say, I show them to my partner, and I've been working on these things forever. And then she's like, but this is a book of apostrophe, and don't you need to think about this? And then I'm like, oh boy, up it goes. And then, you're right? And then go back into it. And then there's my editor, Phil Hall. And so he's the other member of my collective. I've got a couple of poets, other creatures that come around too, that generally just throw their arms up and exclaim when things are really great. So that's
That's what you need.
that's my collective.
Yeah,
I
that's a great collective.
yeah.
Who's your reader, Yasuko?
I share what I write with my partner. My editor, Nicole Winstanley, I just love her. She reads me like a soul sister. She gets what I'm trying to do, and she also is the kind of editor that's really hands-off. She'll give me, 2 pages of notes for a novel, nothing on the copy, just notes, and goes, do what you want with these, and gives me the freedom to run with them. But I'm a pretty harsh editor of my own work. I mean, I read and reread, and yeah, but to have a good editor, it's like the person who tells you you've got lipstick on your teeth before you go out, or your slip is showing. It's like you pretty much got the whole outfit together, but there's just this and this.
And you will blame them if they don't tell you. after it's
Exactly.
published.
Oh, yeah, that happened once, and somebody didn't catch something, and a reviewer caught it, and I was like, oh.
Yeah.
This is somebody's fault, but of course, ultimately, it was mine. But that's what happens when you write historical fiction. You got to be careful. You get the canons right, or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, writing is such an internal process that you go through your own work, and you know it so well that you don't, I compare it to walking along a path in the woods that you know very well. You step over the roots, you step over the stones, and then somebody who isn't familiar with that path will trip and say, what's that stone doing there? Why is that there? Shouldn't that go? Because you could get hurt. And you didn't see it because you're so completely aware of it as you're going. And that second reader can be so helpful for just making things a bit smoother.
You know what a really good trick is change your font and change the color of your font, and then all of a sudden the path is different. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's very true. Or some structural change. if you teach a book often enough, there'll be a new edition will come out, and it will have different pagination, and the paragraphs will begin on different pages than from what you remember, and you will
And
read
it's
the
a whole
book
different
almost
book.
entirely differently,
Yes,
going, I
it's
didn't see
true.
that before.
Yeah,
And it'll be like an entirely different book. So yeah, shaking things up to be able to catch yourself, for sure. In the same article, Pinkney quotes Hardwick as saying, the problem with finishing anything is that you just have to do it again, from which he comes to understand that to write, that is the act, not just the idea of it, is the last thing that you want to do. How difficult is it for you to begin something new? And I understand that some of you are terribly prolific, but do you have strategies for overcoming inertia? If you indeed experience any of that stuff, do you have ways of, you say you have a free write almost to get the juices flowing. Are there other strategies that you use to get you out of inertia and into writing?
I find if I'm sort of stuck and I'm in this weird place where I'm like, oh, I should be writing, rather than just kind of like being like, okay, maybe I'll wait and go for a walk instead and see it, maybe something will come. But I try to keep like, I call it my little book of orphans, which is like lines or ideas or things that I just didn't fit into somewhere else, or that I sort of thought of or wrote in my phone or wrote in a sticky note that I keep all in a book. And if I'm in that place where I'm like, okay, I should write, it's probably about time that I do something, then I would just like flip through that. And usually something will jump out, something that, you know, maybe years in the past I wrote down and then just never went back to. And then I see it again with new eyes, with fresh eyes, and go, oh, maybe that is something that I can work with now. So having this kind of like stable of like half-formed ideas floating around that can sort of pluck at.
So you keep a kind of a book of stuff with you. And do you write constantly in it, putting things down?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on, I keep it on the computer now because I've kept filling notebooks, so, but now it's like on a document on the computer that I can just kind of scroll through to see what sort of jumps out that I
The
might
ideas
wanna-
folder.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Any other tricks? Tricks, please?
Research?
Research. Oh, that's a
Yeah.
good one.
I'm actually, I don't know, I feel like I've been in this position for a couple of months now where I really want to be writing and I can't find the time to write. Like I just don't have enough time to actually just sit down, and I'm really slow. It takes me a really long time to sort of get things down. But the way that I felt engaged is I am still doing a lot of that research and like thinking through some of those ideas and like organizing them into a lot of color-coded folders. That like I hope I will get to one day.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There are ways to defeat that kind of inertia, and yeah. But if you're like Yasuko, you don't need to. You've got too many ideas to go through already. Let's see. I think we started a little late, so I'll just. I like this quotation from Orwell. He says, "Writing a book is a horrible, exhausting struggle, like a long bout of some painful illness. One would never undertake such a thing if one were not driven by some demon whom one can neither resist nor understand. For all one knows, that demon is simply the same instinct that makes a baby squall for attention. And yet it is also true that one can write with nothing readable unless one constantly struggles to efface one's own personality. Good prose is like a window pane. To what extent do you try to efface your personality in your writing, or do you?"
These are really interesting questions. It's like, I've never thought of that before.
I only efface myself in my own work when, like, I efface myself in real life. So sometimes that comes through in the work, I suppose. But I don't know that I would
That's
ever
an interesting thought.
consciously do that
Yeah.
to myself
Yeah.
on the page. You know, enough of it happens in the real world. I should have a more humorous answer, maybe. My apologies.
But especially with poetry, like because I don't
Poetry
know
is
that
the
much of
self.
it. Like, isn't that all
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
so?
Oh, well, yes and no. I mean, when you teach poetry, you make very damn well sure that you tell your students that the speaker is not the poet. Don't make that mistake. you know, or at least you try to remember to tell them that. And it's very, very tempting to think that Sylvia Plath is that person in the poem, but she's not.
Then you get into every poetry workshop ever in existence, and you're like, oh, the poet is the speaker, poet is the speaker,
The
poet is the
poet.
speaker.
You're going, So no effacing going on. Just right out there. Yourself on the page.
I think, yeah, it's hard to not be in creative nonfiction. There's not really a lot of like room to hide. Well, maybe that's not true. I think maybe that probably isn't true, because I think I have a really distanced, I hold myself at a distance a lot when I'm writing. I think not just for myself, but also part of it is trying to give the reader that distance as well, especially when I'm writing about, you know, my family and like decision. I think one of the things I worried about, and this was tied to like the ethics question too, was, you know, people in my family have done really painful things. You know, they haven't treated themselves or other people well, and you know, it would be easy for someone to come in and really like lay some judgment on them, but you know, there's a reason that I have so much love for them. And what I always work to do is give the people who are reading the book all of those pieces. And you know, some people come to the conclusion of like, well, if you just left, like, you would have saved yourself a lot of grief. And it's like, oh, yeah, probably. But I couldn't, and I think some readers can see why or understand why.
Yeah, for sure. I have lots more questions, but perhaps you do too. So if there are questions from the audience, if you could just speak loudly, because you don't have a microphone, or if you wish, you could come down and speak here. But questions? For any of the readers up here, if you have a question for one author in particular. I know that always stumps people. You throw that out the outside, like, I had a question, but it just went away. Thanks a lot.
It's been a long night, too. Maybe people would have asked the question about something about, yeah, I'm just saying, it's a long night. Maybe there's no questions left in us.
They've answered all your questions. That's so good. Oh, no, there's one.
Okay, I had a question about a question. So earlier you mentioned that repetition was something that there was some degree of decay in, and that it was to be, to some sense, avoided. And I was just curious to ask maybe the opposite of that. Is there any beauty in watching your own art decay? Is there any beauty in like the fecundity of that?
Any beauty in watching your own art decay?
Totally. Absolutely. I love that question and that idea. One of my friends is working on right now decay in her poetry, Ellie Kralji Gardner, which is really gorgeous. But yes, like even in my work, decays as I go. Like often I start with a long thing and I just keep cutting and keep getting down to the bone until there's like nothing left on the page. And then I write the next poem and do the same thing. And the repetition, the decay, I don't know, it's all wonderful. I think it's great.
There's something interesting too, I think, in sort of, there's like almost a material decay to it. I mean, I have poems scattered in various like literary journals that are defunct now, and those poems kind of don't really exist in the world anymore. It's, you put it out there and then it's transient and disappears, and then maybe you forget about it, and then maybe you accidentally or on purpose write the same thing again. The idea comes back in a new form, and you've forgotten because that poem is out there in a zine that 6 people read, and now it's gone. And it's a strange that, like, especially like on the internet, I guess everything you write kind of lives and doesn't live. It always exists in this like permanent half-life. I have a friend who's a visual artist, and she was taught by one of her instructors to actively destroy your older work when it didn't sell, because it devalued your newer work.
Yeah.
So she would like cut up her old work and sell it as bookmarks or as like book covers and other little things, and that's what she taught. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, is there an equivalent to that for writing? Is there a way that you can kind of cut up your old work and and make it disappear, or is it always going to exist out there somewhere in the world once it's been sort of published?
Yeah, I mean, you're right about those journals that just, you published in Prairie Fire 35 years ago. Where is that now? It's nowhere. Maybe on somebody's shelf in their basement, but that's it for that particular piece. And there's a kind of a decay, a half-life of poems, I guess.
It's all going to be gone one day.
Yeah,
I do think
I was
about
just
that
thinking,
too.
like,
Yeah, it's
isn't
all
it,
gonna be
isn't
gone
that
one
just
day, yeah.
life? I mean, things happen, they go away. I mean,
Yeah.
memory and, yeah. all
But I
that.
think that is one of the elements, or like one of the things that defines beauty, or is that is the recognition that it is as you perceive it in this moment in time, but that it won't always be. I think that really like tied to like a thing is beautiful because you can't anticipate its loss, almost.
Wasn't that like Lorca's whole idea of duende and stuff, right? Oh, am I? Okay, well, we just won't go there then.
There's a kind of faith in it too, because it carries with it kind of this implication that, well, more beauty will arise to fill that. Like this will pass, but something else
Or nothing.
will come, or nothing. But we're I know it's the first day of autumn. It's the beginning of autumn, Danielle. You got to wait like 3 more weeks of rain, and then it can be nothing.
Okay, all right.
Yes, here.
Yes, I'm always interested in why one starts to write. Are the influences? Was there an event in your life that happened that caused you to write? Was there some illumination? For me, it was when I broke my leg after a track meet and spent part of the summer in a cast. I went to the library and got up. I don't know why, but books by Sartre, Camus, Tolstoy, and James Joyce. And after reading Joyce, that's it. I want to be a writer. But that was the moments that happened to me. So what happened to you that started your writing?
What happened to you?
Me?
All of you.
Well, I can tell you that my mom always read me poetry, like from when I was wee. But I mean, when I heard E. Cummings' "Up So Floating, Many Bells Down," I was like, "Holy shit, language! What is this?" I was just a wee one, and I was like, "Up so floating, many bells down. That's wrong in so many ways. I love it." And that just like I wanna start that. Whatever
what's
that
the other one?
is.
Anyone in the Little How Town? And
Yes.
oh yeah, I wonder. E. Cummings.
Yeah.
You guys too? Yes. No. Oh, I
Not
love.
for
Yeah,
me, yeah.
totally.
I think for me, being a writer wasn't a thing that I understood. I wanted to be a librarian, and I also wanted to be a cop. And so now I'm not either of those things.
They're both police.
Yeah, but for me, it was actually like preservation. Like I started writing because I felt like I needed to remember, and I was taught to like not trust my memory. And so if I could write it down, and sort of like it would exist outside myself, it would hold some truth that I had trouble accessing, like in my walking life.
Yeah. We discover what we know by putting it down, and then we give it a place in the world. Yeah. Neil, what infected you? I mean, how did
How did I catch this terrible, fatal disease?
Yeah.
I think it was just my parents were big readers, books always around, and I just liked to read. I was like, well, writer is something that other people do. That's other out in the world. That I didn't know that was a thing that like people that I knew could do. So I ended up being a biologist instead, because I was like, oh, that's easy. I go out and look at animals, and I don't have to talk to people then.
Now look at you.
But now look at me out here. To me, you are all antelope.
It's a weird place for antelope to be.
Yusuko, in your memoir, Mistakes to Run With, it seems that you started writing very early. Was there a
Yeah.
catalyst, or did you just pick it up?
Well, I've always written from the time I could sort of hold a pencil. I think, you make a conscious choice at a certain point to do something with that writing. So,
Right.
So that was a progression that, oh, maybe I should show people, maybe I should send it out. But the writing preceded that, and yeah, it's, you know, it's a pathology.
Do
There
you
you go.
remember the moment then when you decided, oh, I'm gonna send this out, I'm gonna show this to people?
Believe it or not, in my early 20s, I actually thought, oh, people can make a living at this. I'm going to become a writer, and that's how I'll pay my bills.
What a silly thought.
What a silly thought.
But
Well,
it's
you
worked
know, at
out.
that
It's
age,
worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're at the end of our 2 hours here. It's been lovely. If there are no more questions, I think I will let these very skilled and talented people go home and get themselves some well-deserved rest. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.